What's up, YouTube? It's Should You or Should You, the show where we talk about, Christ, what is it we talk about again? Books. And actually this week's, or I guess this month's, I don't know. I'm busy at work, so I do my best to get these out every week or a couple weeks or so. But this week's episode is about a guy that needs really no introduction. It's Neil Gaiman. We're doing Norse mythology. I like to start my recommendations with a little bit about, the authors themselves. So the author of today's book, Neil Gaiman, is an author who doesn't really need any background or introduction from me, because he's so well known. This is a guy that has put out tons of stuff, and it's super wide ranging, poetry and screenwriting to kids books and teen novels and adult novels, right? But he's probably most famous for American Gods, which is a book he wrote a few years back, probably about 10 years back at this point, and was picked up for a TV series, which is really cool. That's actually another story that kind of centers around mythology and religion a bit, in that the concept is new gods versus old gods. So old gods being Odin and some of your more traditional pagan gods, versus like the new gods, which is like technology and social media and all these different things. So it's a kind of a clash, and this guy's stuck in the middle. That's what he's best known for. This book is not that. It's Norse mythology, but again, it's another book with mythological influence. I think the first thing you probably should know about this particular book, straight from the words of Neil himself, he was talking about his approach to writing this book, and it's not going to be a butchering of myths that we've heard, that we're so familiar with, right? He's not going to go ahead and make Loki a good guy and Thor the most brilliant man on earth. It's just not going to happen, right? Not in this book anyway. So he said he kind of approached this as a musician would, any respectable musician, covering someone else's music, right? Making an album of someone else's music. They don't want to change the story. They want the story to stay the same. They just want to give it their flavor. They just want to give it their voice. And Neil Gaiman does a great job in this, giving these stories his kind of own voice. So you might be asking yourself, and if you've read articles about this, you've probably heard them talking about this, but why Norse mythology and not, say, Roman mythology or Greek mythology or some of the more popular things like that? Well, as a kid growing up in England in the 60s, Neil Gaiman was like really, I don't want to say obsessed, but he was really interested in Marvel's adaptation of Thor, right? So he's a big fan of Thor, and he liked the Norse myths or the Norse gods because their heroes were, they were flawed and the storylines were generally kind of dark, and I think that tailored more to his own sense of psyche or whatever, I don't know, however you want to interpret it, right? I think one of the more funny things that I read that he said about this book is like, in Greek mythology, or why he chose to write about Norse mythology, is that in Greek mythology, there's a lot of sex and drama and things like that. And, there's a lot of, I think his direct quote was, there's a lot of sitting outside staring at yourself. And there's none of that in this. And you can't do that in Norse mythology, because if you sit outside, you're going to freeze to death. And I thought that was kind of funny. So like I said before, Neil's not a stranger to approaching or writing about mythological or these different concepts, right? Again, I mentioned American Gods as an example of that. This is an awesome kind of, it's almost like it's a good overview of the Norse story, right? It's a good overview of all their different gods and all their different monsters and not titans, what were they called? Different cyclops, just different, like, I guess, bad guys from this Norse realm, right? He covers the Norse gods' stories really well in this book, from their conception and the births of all the different gods to the upheaval and Ragnarok, right? So the end of the world, right? Which is what Ragnarok was prophesized at. And I think if you're anything like me and you dig prophecies, right? I don't know why. I think it's probably because of all the comic books I read or superhero stories that I was obsessed with, but I always wanted to be part of some prophecy, right? It was like kind of my dream, like, oh man, I just want to be the kid that is foretold to save save the city, right, or save the world, or whatever the case is. I don't know, whatever you're into. I don't know. Drink the most booze, whatever your prophecy is. But that's kind of what I dig about this writing. It's prophetic, and there's a lot of different prophecies. And I think if you're a nerd like me, then you'll probably really dig that aspect of this book. As a quick side note, I remember, it's kind of funny that Thor's hammer's on the cover of this. I remember when I was reading this book, the latest Thor movie, Ragnarok, was being advertised heavily, marketed heavily, because it was about to be released. And I was actually kind of scared that they were going to end like the Thor world or the Norse world in the movies, because Ragnarok obviously, by definition, means the end of the gods. It's the end of the world for them, and the beginning of a new world. But I'm not going to go too much into that. But anyway, I digress. I think the coolest part about this book is that if you decided to pick it up and you just wanted to read like a story at a time, right? From something, from a bickering between Thor and Loki to, one of Thor's grand journeys and fights with dwarves or whatever monsters, then you can kind of pick that up and just kind of open it up and get to any, my cover's on backwards, and pick up the book and open to any one of the chapters. For instance, this is Hymir and Thor's fishing expedition. You could just pick it up and read that story, read it to your kids, or read it with your friends, or whatever the case is. There's a lot of humor in this book. There's a lot of humor in the stories. There's a lot of awe and different inspiring things. But I think the coolest thing is how he makes these stories humorous. Right? And I think you kind of have to, the way that he kind of describes, especially Thor. Thor in this book isn't the Thor. I mean, I guess he kind of is. I guess Marvel does a good job of depicting him as like kind of super strong and pretty to look at, but not super bright or super sharp or whatever in the movies. But in this, he's really made out to be like the strongest being in the mythological universe, but also one of the dullest intellectually. Whereas Loki is super cunning, really sharp-witted, deviously intelligent. And so he captures all of that in this with a lot of good humor. But if you wanted to read it as a novel, I think that's kind of cool, what's cool about this too. So if you wanted to pick it up and read a story here and there, that's cool. You want to pick it up and read it as an entire novel, the way that Neil writes these stories is he gives it a novelistic arc, right? So it starts with the birth of all the gods and the creation of their universe, to the destruction by fire and ice at Ragnarok, right? Or the Fenrir eats all these gods, okay? So it's crazy. If you want to pick it up and just skip to the very end and read that story, it's well worth it. But yeah, the way that Neil kind of tells these stories and gives a story arc to it makes reading it from start to finish really easy and really enjoyable. A couple things that I was put off by at first, and I don't know that this is true with any of his other work, because I haven't read any of his other work yet, but I felt the writing was really elementary. Not that the way that he tells the stories is bad, because it's great. It's very, you can picture it in your head, and it's really funny, like I said before. But I guess the grace in which the sentences are put together is a little lazy to me. But that might be because of the books that I had read coming into this book. Haruki and Yukio being two authors that are very descriptive and really, really brilliant with how they navigate pages and navigate sentences and throw these things together. But you get over it pretty quick, because you get really into the stories, and I think it's because it's written so simply and because the stories are so interesting, you'll fly through this book. And it normally takes me a long time to read books. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I read a chapter a night before bed, or when I was traveling a lot for work, I would read on the planes. But this one I pick up and read in I think it was 2 weeks or something. So really easy to read, really fun. If you're into Thor, if you're into Odin, if you're into the stories, if you like Loki, you're gonna dig the stories. You have a lot of fun with it. Yeah, so I think one of my favorite stories is Thor visiting the land of the giants. And I'm not gonna give too much, but just a little bit about it. They run into this giant, right? And he promises to help. It's Thor and Loki, they're on a journey. And this giant, his name is Skrymir, he agrees to help them get to where they want to go. And he falls asleep, and Thor and Loki are trying to wake this guy up. And I don't know if you know much about the story behind Thor's hammer, but if you get hit with it, you automatically die, pretty much. Let me just break it down like that. You get hit with Thor's hammer, you automatically die. If he throws it at you, you're dead. And it just comes right back to him whenever he calls it. So like, psh, hammer in my hand, right? So the giant falls asleep and Thor gets hungry. In this book, Thor's kind of made out to be this loof who like just loves eating and drinking pretty much, but is really strong. So he's basically the guy that you hated in high school, but a hero, whatever. And he gets really hungry and he gets really pissed, and the giant's falling asleep, and he's falling asleep on this bag that has all the food in it, so they can't get to it. Like, imagine the mighty Thor trying to grab this bag of food and he can't do it, you know, because this giant has fallen asleep on it. And so, you know, Thor takes his hammer and he slams it on this giant's head, right? The giant kind of was like, whoa, you know, a leaf just fell on my face, you know, what's the deal? So the giant like wakes up, right? And he's like, a leaf just fell on my head. And, you know, he goes, have you all finished eating? You know, are you ready for bed yet? I don't blame you if you are, it's been a long day. And he just kind of falls over and falls asleep again. And they're like, what? You know, we're hungry or whatever. So, you know, Loki and the guy that they're traveling with, they end up falling asleep, but, you know, Thor can't go to sleep. And because of that, he's super angry. He's angry and hungry. And he doesn't trust the giant because he's shifty. He's a shifty giant. So at midnight, Thor has had enough of this giant's snoring, and he's, you know, he's hungry as shit or whatever, so he's got to do something, right? He climbs up onto the giant's head and positions himself in between the giant's eyebrows, and he spits on both of his hands, right? So grabs his hammer. He adjusts his belt of strength and he raises the hammer over his head. And with all the strength he has, he swings down and nails this giant square in the center of his forehead. And then the giant's eyes open, right? So he goes, Thor, what are you doing there, man? An acorn just fell on my head. What time is it? You know, Thor says it's midnight. The giant goes, well, okay, well, I'll see you in the morning. Goes to sleep. Morning comes and Thor still hasn't slept and he's hungry as shit, and the snoring continues. So he gets back up on the giant's head and he hits Skymir in the temple with his hammer with all of his strength. He's pretty sure there's never been a more forceful blow. He hears it echoes on the mountaintops, right? He hears it. He hears that echo on the mountaintop. So the giant Skymir wakes up and he goes, I think a bird's nest just fell on my head. You guys ready to go? Let's go. And he looks at him all sheepishly and gives him a weird grin. And then the story goes on and it all kind of ties back. But there's, like I said, there's a lot of humor in the writing, and the stories all kind of come together full circle. So that's really cool. So Thor's Journey to the Land of the Giants. Make sure you read that one, have a lot of fun with it, and let me know what you think of it. So I'm gonna keep this short. Should you read Norse Mythology, a novel by Neil Gaiman? I think you should. It's a simple read, so it's really easy, really comprehensible. You'll have a lot of laughs, you'll have a lot of fun, and you'll learn something, which is cool. So you'll learn all about Norse mythology and all the different gods, a little bit more than just what you see in the Marvel movies. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. If you have any suggestions on books to read, books to pick up and talk about here on the channel, shoot me an email. That email will be below in the description. I would love to hear from you. I love getting recommendations. I try and go every weekend and just kind of peruse through a bookstore or whatever and see what they've got. So shoot me an email, shoot me a recommendation. If you haven't already, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'll try and put these videos out as often as I can. Again, for those of you guys that have a difficult time kind of knowing what book to read next, or if you're just starting reading, you know, kind of where to begin. So this has been Should You or Should You with Norse Mythology, and of course you should. I'm Michael Vaughan. You guys take care.